We like to use assessment data in our course planning. So looking at what happened last semester and did the assignment that we targeted for the learning, was it a good, like, does it just need tweaks or does it need to be completely revised? And so we tend to use data as a faculty group to talk about planning for the next semester.
If I see something on an exam that I've given that a good majority of the students are missing the concept, I really have to rethink. You have to think about how I presented it, whether we had a lab component to kind of bring it to life, and if we did, what was the lab activity? Did we spend enough time on it? Can it be covered in a different way? Because we give all our exams on our course management program that we have at the Institute. And we get a lot of statistics back from our tests, which can be very helpful in looking at overall performance, item performance, how well the better performers are performing on a certain item versus the lower performers. So there's we get a lot of data that we can actually use. But I try to look at areas where the students aren't doing well and look at my teaching and just try to do a critical reflection on what took place in the classroom.
Faculty have responsibility at the core for looking at assessment data and discussing it and making changes. And that chiefly happens inside departments or programs. So I talked in a previous example about our School of Management. Different departments at Simmons think about this differently. So they may have a subcommittee that looks at data and reports to the full department. The department may be small enough to do it as a whole. In some cases, individual faculty or the chair of the department may do it, but it is absolutely fundamentally a faculty responsibility because it is fundamentally about curriculum.
We have a leadership team around the curriculum and then all the faculty. Because we're a newer program, we've been quite intentional about having all the faculty be involved in those discussions so that everyone knows that it's not just my job, it's not just leadership's job to ensure that the curriculum is assessed. It's everyone's job, and that it's everyone's, not only is it everyone's job, but it's their responsibility to ensure that they implement best practice around assessment and integrate that into their course so that it can be integrated into the curriculum.
Ideally, we want to have everyone involved in it, but it does happen at different, in different places and sort of with different groups at different times. So we have an assessment committee that's made up of, I think, 6 or 7 people, including 2 student reps. And the assessment committee we do the first pass of the data most of the time, right? So we gather all of the data from all of the different assessments that we do, right? So the surveys and the direct assessments for the course embedded assignments and things like that. And we'll pull it together and sort of do a first pass analysis and try to boil things down. Like, if we have a survey that, even if it's only 30 or 40 questions, you can end up with like 50 pages of data in the end. So we try to boil it down into something that's a little bit more manageable. And we have, at this point, we've developed a report template. So for any of the assessments that we do, we have a 2-page template that all of the results can be entered into, and then those go directly to our dean. And then she can review them. So we're sort of doing the first pass, and then with the dean, we'll review things again. And then eventually it goes to the whole faculty. And really, we tend to use faculty as sort of our default word, but typically a lot of our staff are involved as well. So for instance, we have a capstone coordinator who's also really heavily involved in assessment. Our director of curriculum, of course, is involved. So typically, we will share the data just kind of briefly in faculty meetings, but then we have been planning retreats throughout the year where we can get a lot more in-depth. So at the retreats, we'll share reports that are a little bit more in-depth, even than those 2 pages that we typically send to the dean. And we'll identify issue areas, and then usually we'll have like 2 to 3 hours where we'll just be sort of discussing and brainstorming. And again, this is open to everybody. Adjunct faculty are invited, like I said, staff, and usually we have student representation as well. So like I said, I think ideally everyone should be involved because everyone brings a different perspective and each person notices something a little bit different.
I have the pleasure of seeing everything, every activity, and because of accreditation reporting, I see student performance on these different activities, and it really has helped provide me with a window into understanding the curriculum and where students are really thriving and where they're struggling. And it can help with the individual student too. I think it'll be helpful in about 6 months from now. We'll have students sort of repository their some of their assessments to do some reflection on their own. I think that'd be helpful for the students to see where their strengths and their weaknesses are.
I think one of the things it's done is help me to sort of differentiate between those sort of general anecdotal feelings that I have about who our students are and how well they perform or how much they know and understand about certain areas of the field and what they actually know and understand.
On the undergraduate program curriculum committee, we build and assess the results of a content exam. And that exam goes to all of our senior students in their capstone course in their senior year. We've been able to look at the results of that exam and see whether or not our students are meeting our learning objectives with the content. But beyond that, with the students as a whole, we can also look at student groups. Maybe our transfer students aren't coming with the core curriculum knowledge that we hope they do. So then we can initiate discussions with our transfer institutions that we work with and ensure that they are building the right curriculum for the students that are then joining us. Or maybe we find a different population, like the international students might be struggling in one area of the curriculum, and we can reach out to the organizations on campus that work with international students to see how we can fix things so that they can better learn.
Inside of the institution, really, in our institution, it's at the program level. So our program leadership has access across the curriculum. We share that with our faculty as a whole. The faculty have their own courses, but then we share results with everyone. And then we share select results with the institution as well in different reporting mechanisms. We don't have centralized assessment office. As far as outside of the institution, we do a lot of sharing with our accrediting agency, and that comes in all forms, through each course in the curriculum, through all the learning objectives, through the program philosophy, and it's really an assessment focused to show how our program maintains accreditation standards.
Within the institution, there's a couple of sort of standard reporting procedures, I guess. So I mentioned that the assessment committee will gather most of the data initially. It gets shared with the deans, and then it will also go to the all college assessment committee. So once a year, we put together a report that sort of outlines all of the assessment activities for our department for that year, and that goes to our assistant provost in the provost's office. But also within the institution, as I mentioned, we've got certain people who have to get some of the feedback who may not be directly involved in say, the assessment committee or the faculty, but they definitely need to be made aware of what kind of data we're getting and what it's telling us. So like I said, certainly we have to share it with all the faculty because it directly impacts what our expectations are in the classroom. But also, for instance, our internship coordinator or our student services offices, we want to make sure that they're aware of what kind of information we're getting from the students. And especially things that are relevant to them. If we're getting specific feedback about, advising or student groups or the kinds of support that they get from student services, then of course we want to share that. But I think even more broadly, they should kind of be aware of across the program, how are we doing meeting all of our different goals. In terms of sharing externally, I would say at this point, we haven't been sharing a lot of information externally, beyond accreditation reports and things like that. Or at least not, we've been sharing it probably at a very high level of aggregation. So for instance, we do try to keep a lot of lines of communication open with employers. We have a number of people who host interns for us, and we have hosted employer focus groups and things like that. And I think that it's a good circle of communication because we get information from them about what their expectations are, what skills and competencies they think are most important. But it also is a chance for us to share some information with them about what we're seeing in our students, possibly concerns that we have or things that we're really excited about. I think one thing that I am unsure of in terms of sharing information externally too is just what the ethics are around that. In a lot of the information that we gather, especially course-embedded assignments and things like that, I think have to be, there's some issues of privacy and confidentiality, but I think if we share sort of high-level aggregate information, that's fine.
We have most of our assessment being looked at an individual program level, and that data is collected in a couple different ways. So programs collect their own data of the kind and type that they want to, and that can vary from looking at student pre and post tests to collecting whole student portfolios in their program to possibly collecting just individual artifacts of student work from select courses and assessing that work with rubrics. And that they take ownership of, and certainly we have an assessment management system, TK20, that allows us to have them enter that data into a system where I can analyze it for them. I can pull together the data and organize it for them in ways that makes it more usable and makes it easier for them to interpret it. But again, there's a piece of that's got to involve their own judgment. That's got to involve their own qualitative analysis of what students are learning in addition to whatever quantitatively we can pull out. And then on top of that, we have a graduating student survey that is our own creation on our campus that we administer to students every time they're getting ready to graduate. And that data can be disaggregated and shared with individual programs to think about what kind of programmatic changes they make. Now, that's not something that we would do on an annual basis because with response rates on the survey, sample sizes are usually too small for them to draw any conclusions. But as programs go through a 5-year cycle of program review, we can give them 5 years of data and they can sit down and reflect on it. And so the program level is the primary level where this assessment data is being used. And then it's also going to be used at the institution level. And so I do 2 things in my role as Director of Assessment along those lines. One is to work with some campus-wide groups, like our General Education Committee, what we call our Liberal Arts and Sciences Council, and also, as well as that, with the faculty as a whole when they come together for our development days. And then finally with our deans, where I sit down and have monthly meetings with the deans focused on some data that we think they need to sort of bring to the attention of their chairs, raise the importance of. And oftentimes that's data from the National Survey for Student Engagement, where we want to, our latest administration of that, we want to highlight where there seem to be patterns emerging over time in terms of the way students are responding, areas of strength, areas of weakness. But it also can be the assessment data itself. What have we found in individual programs as we've assessed, and summarizing that for the dean so that they understand and can engage meaningfully in conversation with chairs about how to address some of the bigger issues in terms of what students are learning.
When I first started teaching, I designed my course by thinking about, I have 15 weeks, I have so many hours, these are the chapters I want to cover and the content I want to deliver. this is how many exams I can fit in. And I realized by going through the assessment process that I was doing that backwards. I needed to start with, what are the learning goals and objectives I'm setting for my students in this class? Where do I want to see them 15 weeks later? And then I build my course from there. So I can actually show them as well in the syllabus, these are the objectives I want you to meet. This is how the course material is going to help you meet them, and this is how you'll be assessed to ensure that you got there.